Welcome to lesson 23. This is about education fade out, the fact that there is some evidence that even though you give a child early education training, that say by the end of the third grade it is totally faded away and you cannot tell the difference between that child and a child that did not go through early training. So the title of the lesson is Does Early Learning Fade Away? The lesson is about academic fade out. This quote sets the stage. Fade out is not a new discovery. Many studies of early childhood interventions have found that the academic differences between the intervention and the control groups are reduced and sometimes eliminated within a few years of the intervention. Taken as a whole, however, the research paints a much less dismal picture of the value of preschool than these authors provide, even if the effects of preschool do fade while the children are in elementary school. Not so long ago, a debate on more pre-K versus less pre-K took place in Indiana. There were factions in favor of spending state money and some opposed. The most vocal opposition came from Grover J. Whitehurst, senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. He says, there is no available evidence to show that state government should make large investments in establishing or expanding a pre-K program. As one reviews the literature of early on educational programs, it is not unusual to see instances where Mr. Whitehurst is correct. The implication is that these pre-K and earlier programs are not productive, so it is a waste of money to offer them. Here's my take on this topic. Yes, indeed, fade out can occur, but the reason for the moving together of the special program trained students and the ordinary students is a problem of the first 3 grades of elementary school and not a lack of efficacy of the early ed program. Even if there is fade out, the children that had the special training exhibit long-term benefits. These are the 2 different types of training that need to be imparted to students. Number 1 are cognitive skills such as reading, math, science, etc. And the other, which is very important, are the non-cognitive skills, what I call character and grit. Both of these are essential for student success, both as a student and in later life. As will be seen in this lesson, the non-cognitive skills are needed at the earliest point in a student's life. Okay, there is ample evidence that the results from some early ed programs begin to fade out around the 3rd grade. Does this mean the programs are not effective? Or are we doing something wrong? The answer is no. It's not the early program that is at fault, and yes, we are doing something wrong. Here is a quotation from Stanford professor Deborah Stipik. Is fade out inevitable? No. Studies have shown definitively that investment in preschool can yield sustained effects and significant social and economic returns. But fade out is common and remains a persistent reminder that simply providing preschool to low-income children is not sufficient to achieve a long-term benefit. This quotation shines light on the fact that something else is wrong, not the early ed program. Here is a quotation from Kelsey Piper, published in Vox on October the 6th, 2018. There's a bizarre seeming paradox sitting at the heart of research into early childhood education. On the one hand, there's a sizable body of research suggesting that kids who go through intensive education at the ages 3 and 4 don't really come out ahead in terms of academic abilities. By kindergarten, much of their advantage has receded, and by the second grade, researchers typically cannot detect it at all. On the other hand, there was an equally substantive body of research suggesting that early childhood education produces a profound, lifelong advantage. Kids who enter intensive preschool programs are less likely to be arrested, more likely to graduate, and less likely to struggle with substance abuse as adults. One study, with a follow-up when the students were in their mid-30s, found that they were likelier to have eventually attended and completed college. Du Bailey and others say this in the Washington Post. Additionally, even if the initial benefits fade rapidly, a handful of the most rigorously implemented and evaluated programs appear to produce benefits that persist well into adulthood. Participants graduate from high school at a higher rate, earn more, have fewer run-ins with the law, and lead healthier lives than peers from similar backgrounds. They say we don't know exactly why. Here's a quote from the very famous Professor James Heckman, Nobel Prize winning economist from the University of Chicago. I must say that Dr. Heckman takes a special interest in education of the poor. It ignores an overwhelming body of recent evidence that shows to the contrary, so-called fade-out doesn't exist. In our recent work, we carefully study the effectiveness of a wide range of early childhood programs that receive government funding, including Head Start. We found that all provide benefits and lasting effects to children who would have experienced lower quality care or have otherwise not received quality childhood education. Here is a practical, down-to-earth example of one thing that can produce fade-out. We're going to view an excerpt from my February 3rd talk to the Indianapolis Science Tech Club.
One teacher's dilemma. This is my daughter-in-law. She came over last night. We watched the Super Bowl together. She's a kindergarten teacher at a Marion County school. She has 26 students. 17 of them come to school with what she calls no print concepts. They can't identify the front of the book. They don't know how to read from left to right. They have no idea how to approach the text, from the bottom up, from the top down, from the right to the left, or whatever. They have no feeling for that whatsoever. And let's see. And 9 children are okay readers. So the question you ask is, so what's going to happen to these okay readers and what's going to happen to the rest of them? Well, I'll tell you right now, one teacher who's got a class of 26 kids is not going to bring those 17 kids up the curve to have them reading. Back to the focus group interview, those people felt that if a kid cannot read by the time they get into kindergarten, it's too late. I mean, they must enter kindergarten with the ability to read. So
this clip illustrates a teacher's dilemma. How should a teacher handle this quandary? There are too many children to advance both groups to the appropriate level. If she focuses on the 9 children who are where they belong skill-wise, she will have to pay less attention to the 17 students who are in desperate need of help. If she does it the other way around, she will not be able to advance the skills of the children who can already read. I'm not sure what goes through a teacher's head, but it's probably something like this. If I send my kindergarten class to the first grade and 17 children cannot read at an appropriate level, I will look bad and I will be depriving these 17 kids of essential skills. I can do the most good by assuring the 17 students are capable readers. After all, The first grade teacher will never know how little the 9 reading students grew in their skills. There you go. Fade out has begun. All the time and money spent on these 9 children begin to lose its value. What can be done to minimize the fade out? We could add another teacher in the classroom, and we could probably work with both groups to advance all reading skills. If in a similar situation, like my daughter-in-law's, in the first grade or the next grade, puts the teacher in the same position, fade out will occur. The situation is a perfect example of the quotation I use at the beginning of this lesson. A convoy sails with the speed of the slowest ship. Here are a couple of practices that will avoid fade out. Make sure most children in the later classes attended early ed programs. Number 2, develop momentum tracks so that young children with well-developed skills can be independent of children not so well prepared. In Lesson 22, we looked at the monetary returns from several programs. Here is a video featuring Dr. James Heckman, Nobel Prize-winning economist from the University of Chicago. He points out that some of the most important things learned by children in these programs have to do with non-cognitive skills, what I have called character and grit. Let's watch Dr. Heckman.
During the school year. Perry was a study that was done in Michigan in the early 1960s, and it was motivated actually by individuals working in a public school system. If you look at the original documents, they all thought they were boosting IQ. And then one of the most surprising findings that came out of Perry and subsequent work was that most of the boost came in other aspects: social and emotional skills, personality, aspects of being able to engage others, to restrain oneself, self-control. Those are all things that people just simply weren't looking at. What was interesting about Perry is that these people put their money where their mouth was. They followed these children for close to 40 years after the initial study. They were able to essentially see that the treatment group and the control group were very different at age 40. And they were always different at age 27. And we're actually collecting data now on these people at age 50. And so what we find is that the major mechanism, the major way that we've boosted the lives of these children is through their social and emotional skills. That's a major finding, and people didn't know that. Well, the Abecedarian program is a program that was developed in North Carolina. The initial program was very much more intensive than the Perry program. Working with small groups, working with kids, individualizing, what the child development psychologists would call scaffolding, and giving them a range of activities and kind of challenging them and taking them to the next step. And we look at actually the outcomes for those children when they are 35 years of age. And surprise, it turned out that those children in the treatment group had much better measures of health, adult health. And that wasn't expected. And it wasn't even part of the original architecture. And it came, now we understand much better why that happened. But what we did is we changed not only their cognitive skills, they're a little bit smarter in terms of IQ, a little bit smarter in terms of their achievement test, but they're also a lot smarter in some sense about social and emotional skills. They follow doctor's instructions, they stay on course, they stay with regimen. They're more cautious about how they live and the risks they take. And the real question is how this can be then transformed into what their full lifetime wealth, what their full lifetime outcome will be in terms of their health, their mental health, and in terms of their achievement in the workplace and education and the like. The gaps the children had when they left high school were more or less there when they entered their first year of kindergarten. And gaps were there between social and economic groups, race groups, and so forth. We know that we can do something about those gaps by giving children richer environments. What it really is doing, these early childhood programs, is giving a lot of disadvantaged kids the kind of advantages that middle class and upper middle class families give to their children already. Reading to the kid, stimulating the kid, encouraging the kid. If you're a sharp cookie, if you have a high IQ, what's called fluid intelligence, the ability to solve problems at age 10, that's going to generally stay with you throughout life. But if you look, for example, at the structure of personality skills, personalities evolve. So little kids are actually quite innocent beings, most of them, and they gradually develop these skills and they become more and more rich in the sense that we think of the adult personality is very much richer than the child's personality.
As you may know by now, because it's come up in several lessons, in December of 2017, Roman and Littlefield published my book titled, "The Kids Are Smart Enough, So What's the Problem? A Businessman's Perspective on Education Reform and the Teacher Crisis." Here is figure 3 taken from the book. This is what I call the success equation. It is made up of 2 factors. One are the cognitive skills, the skills of the brain, and I list them here as knowledge and thinking skills. And you add to that character and grit that I call issues of the heart, since they are not directly associated with the brain in the way of a cognitive skill. Add these 2 together and you get a successful person. What Dr. Heckman is talking about in his talk is the middle part of this success equation. Having a great brain is not the only key to success. It must be combined with skills of the heart. So we're going to digress a minute here and build on this idea by looking at what we learned about child behavior in my book. In writing the book, we had a great working group made up of 4 fourth grade teachers. This team was crucial in where we ended up. We did a lot of work defining the spectrum of behavioral definitions. The teachers named 3 kinds of students in the behavioral spectrum: the engaged students, the followers, and the disruptive students. They gathered data for 44 classroom days to find this: the behavior of the most disruptive students cost the classroom 28% of a teaching day. Here's another way of looking at this 28%. If a student attends school 5 days a week, they only receive 3.6 days of instruction. That is a loss, particularly for a poor child, of opportunities to learn that we just cannot afford to let continue. When I asked the teachers to describe what was different about the disruptive students, they listed a number of things. The first out on the table was this: they just quit. They give up. No perseverance. Another one was they quickly go to conflict, etc. Later, I would say a year later, after reading Paul Tuff's book, How Children Succeed, Grit, Curiosity, and the Hidden Power of Character, I realized that we were talking about character and grit. These kids are missing character and grit. These skills will be essential in the long-term future, but they are needed right now, so the teachers can do their jobs without the constant interruption. Heckman says these non-cognitive skills are essential to the long-term success, and they are developed in a well-performed early education program. Such skills may not be the direct desire of program designers, but they are a very important byproduct of most early ed programs. Before wrapping up with conclusions from the last 2 lessons, let's look at a school system that has done it right. This video features Dr. Jerry Wiest, Superintendent of Montgomery County Schools in Maryland. They have developed ways to keep the fade out from happening.
Fade out. It's a term we hear often in early education. Hundreds of studies have shown that children who go to high-quality pre-kindergarten programs, especially low-income and minority children, are more likely to do well in school. Pre-kindergarten is a proven way to close achievement gaps. But several other studies have shown that the gains from pre-K can disappear or fade out by the end of 3rd grade, or even earlier.
When I took a good close look at the district, I found that there were actually 2 districts. each of these little areas is a school.
As superintendent of one of the largest school systems in America, Montgomery County Schools in Maryland, Dr. Jerry Wiest is no stranger to achievement gaps. When he first came to Montgomery County in 1999, he found that students in schools in more affluent parts of the district, which he called the green zone, scored higher on achievement tests. In the red zone were schools with more poor and minority students, which had lower achievement scores. Research shows that gaps like these start early, often before age 5 or 6. So Dr. Wiest created an early success plan, which zeroed in on early education in the red zone by adding more pre-kindergarten, full-day kindergarten, smaller class sizes, and summer enrichment programs. 10 years later, Montgomery County schools have not only avoided fade-out, but they're on their way to closing the achievement gap. What's their secret? Pre-K third alignment. Not sure what I mean? Think of early education as a ladder. Children need to start school with a solid base of pre-reading and pre-math skills and socio-emotional skills, which they can get in places like public pre-K, Head Start, or a community-based preschool program, and of course from mom and dad. But just going to pre-K or Head Start isn't enough. Curriculum and standards have to be aligned so that as students climb up from grade to grade, their teachers know where they are coming from. If children are forced to reach too high, they can be lost due to frustration and lack of support. If they repeat previously learned material or even step down a rung, they can lose interest in learning. In other words, pre-K helps children be kindergarten ready, but schools need to be ready too. Dr. Wiest was ready, and he had a plan. He strengthened the added pre-K and summer programs with an aligned curriculum and standards that extend all the way through 3rd grade and beyond.
It does no good to say just, I'm going to put full day kindergarten in. You have to say full day kindergarten to do what? And if you did accomplish the what that you're putting forward, how does that translate to the next level? Will it stick? And will it build cumulatively? And does it really make any difference when you hit 8th grade, 11th grade, graduation? Does it get you college ready?
Dr. Wiest is a data man. He wants to know how each of his students is progressing towards his college readiness target. So he introduced age-appropriate assessments to help teachers and parents understand where students are struggling and how to help them. He admits not everybody was excited about using assessments for children so young. It took some convincing, but having the right assessments has paid off.
You can show them that they are adding value, and you can show them that that value does translate for that child to be able to go somewhere. It makes a kindergarten teacher feel special, or an early childhood teacher to feel special.
Wiest added professional development coaches in elementary schools because he knew that it wasn't just students that needed help, but teachers too.
Then you were constantly in training about how to diagnose and how to skillfully remediate, accelerate.
In the end, Montgomery County had created its own pre-K third ladder. Standards were aligned and teachers were talking to each other. And most of all, it was working.
When you look at these kids that we started with in reform, they're now sophomores. They're just coming in their sophomore year. Well, let's look at how they've done. They were like a bubble going through a hose, you know how it will just move on up. Everywhere they went, the scores got better.
In kindergarten, nearly all students are reading simple text, and the huge racial gap that existed only 5 years ago is gone.
I heard 1st grade teachers threw away their lesson plans because the kids already knew the 1st grade material. They had to go up, up, up.
In 3rd grade, math scores are up by 10% since 2003. Reading scores are up nearly 20%. In 8th grade, the number of students passing algebra has nearly doubled.
What we found is that trajectory is like rolling thunder. It just rolls up every time. And we've had to strengthen our curriculum because these children, as they moved up, they were the vanguard of change for all of our curriculum systemically across the district, and the children behind them were actually able to do better because every year we've gone up in in all grades.
Instead of fade out, a focus on pre-K third alignment in Montgomery County has prompted natural growth and systemic reform. Implementing a pre-K third system isn't easy, especially since so many children attend pre-K outside of the public school system. But there are ways policymakers can help. Increase access to Head Start and state pre-kindergarten programs. Quality early education is important, especially for at-risk children. Yet 10 states still have no pre-kindergarten program. Encourage school districts to use Title I dollars for early education and include pre-K third early education academies as an option for elementary schools that are restructuring under No Child Left Behind. Encourage more collaboration among preschools and the K-12 system. And finally, encourage age-appropriate assessments of young children's learning. But Dr. Weiss says the most important thing is vision.
First step, I'd ask any superintendent that calls me, where are you going? If you're wanting just to get AYP, call somebody else. If you're wanting to get your children college ready, this is the right approach.
Here are the conclusions from both Lesson 22 and 23. If families are unable to provide a stimulating environment for their young children, the government can successfully supply such an environment. Program fade is an issue, but is not caused from mental deficiencies of the children or shortcomings of their early ed program. It is a downstream problem that can be fixed. There is a good financial return on properly designed and executed 0 to 5 year programs, in spite of the fact they are expensive to implement. Even if a program does not produce a good return on investment, there are valuable payoffs in the non-cognitive skills that are essential to completing school and later employment. This concludes Lesson 23. Thank you for your time.